Aera and her best friend Spoil are students at a famous high school that puts emphasis on the necessity that students must join in extracurricular activities. For this purpose, there are several activity clubs in the school, but the girl doesn't find any of them to her liking or interesting enough to join. After a lot of consideration, she decides to seek her teacher's permission to open a club of their liking. However, they meet the school's celebrity student Alan at the teacher's office, who's also there for the same purpose. While Spoil finds it hard to take her eyes off the young man, Aera is totally opposite of her. She finds it further irritating when Alan's proposal for the non-human photography club gets the teacher's approval because he already has 5 members on board. On the other hand, Aera is advised to find 3 more people interested in the music from the 90s era if she wishes to open a club in that genre. The pair each drag one of their friends to join the club and bribe another classmate to make the required count complete. The person whom Aera gets to sign up for the club is her childhood friend Liftoil. It's further revealed that the reason for her unusual interest in old music is her deceased father. Her father was a famous singer of his time, and she started listening to his songs in his memory that eventually refined her taste in music. She finally gets the permission to open her music club after completing the condition of minimum 5 members and gets a room assigned to their club. However, upon reaching the designated club room, they discover that they're to share the room with the non-human photography club. Aera doesn't look happy about the sharing part, more so when her childhood frenemy Sky happens to be a part of the other club. The pair is always at each other's throats, and Sky tells his friend Gent that she's an odd person. Gent hails from a rich background and doesn't look too bothered by anything, including Aera's rants about having to share the already little space with their club. Members from both clubs decide a common place to hide the club keys for the first person to open the room every day, or the last to lock it, so that the keys are always accessible to anyone from both clubs. On their way back from the keys' location, they discover a new student waiting for the club members to announce that he's looking to join the music club. However, Aera denies the request, citing the reason that they already have 5 members, but Spoil convinces her against it since Neo is quite popular and is a good singer as well. Sky seizes the chance to accept him in his club and refuses to back down when Aera tells Neo that he can join their club. Both of them end up having an argument and finally decide on letting the young man rotate between the clubs on alternate days. Eventually, she gets to meet Pak from Alan's club and find him quite pleasant to the eye, as well as ears, as the young man is a sweet talker, coupled with being an athlete. However, she doesn't appear satisfied with the congested room being shared by 2 clubs and openly expresses her opinions on the matter. They divide the room in 2 equal portions using a red adhesive tape to settle the boundary, and the music club finally gets to relax and listen to their favorite songs. On the other hand, the photography club is engrossed in secretly trolling the music club by targeting their appearances. From Liftoil's short height to Spoil's teeth alignment and Aera's odd personality, they target everything until 2 more girls arrive there, one after another. While Sonia comes off as scary to the boys, almost all of them are smitten by Grace's lovely personality. One of the guys from the photography club is actually known for his playboy nature and instantly tries to hit on her, but Grace runs away, exclaiming that she can't breathe in the presence of so many boys. If not for Neo's presence, Aera's club would have been shut down the same day it was inaugurated. Play also looks interested in Aera and tries to ask her why she chose to open a club about the music from the 90s. From their conversation, he himself appears to know a lot about the genre but fails to impress the girl, who's far more well-versed in the subject. Next day, Aera is stunned to find lockers in the club room, courtesy of Gent, who believes they all can use them for safekeeping. He even leaves a mini portable fan in Aera's locker and asks for her social media account, using the excuse of having to stay in contact since they're sharing the space and may need to contact each other in case of emergency. The girl has no choice but to give in, as she feels obliged to in the face of his generosity. Later, Aera learns about philophobia during one of her lectures. Her teacher explains the phobia to be a fear of falling in love that makes her consider her own circumstances, as she feels a similar kind of fear. She even expresses her dislike for all the 7 members of the photography club, giving Spoil the green signal to pursue whomever she wants amongst them without having to worry about snatching her crush. Spoil can't be any happier and reveals how she's unable to decide on one of them, so far as she finds them all charming. Aera can't help but be amazed at her friend's skills. During the club hours, Sky gets into an argument with Aera for playing the old, outdated songs on the loudspeaker, although a few of his club members are seen enjoying the vibe. She tries to get back with the best retorts, but Sky seems to have quite a venomous tongue, almost cornering her. Frustrated, Aera confronts Liftoil for not helping her, but notices that he's busy writing a love note that he immediately hides and doesn't show to her despite her whiny requests. On the other hand, Her arguments with Sky turn out to be just a habitual thing instead of being something deep-rooted. After a day of fights at the club, the pair walks home together since they're neighbors too, and Sky returns her one of the song cassettes that he took some days ago without her permission. He shamelessly expresses how he liked the song and forgot to return it earlier. They meet Aera's mother outside her home. The lady looks quite pleased to see her daughter with Sky and offers him a nice lunchbox that her client canceled at the last moment. She seems quite enthusiastic about getting her daughter to date someone and encourages her to go for it, but Aera acts quite opposite of the expectations. Next day, she finds a love note in her locker with a cute teddy bear drawing but fails to figure out who the sender can be. She imagines shouting at everyone to confess who the sender is, but eventually decides against it and simply crumples the note down before throwing it into the dustbin. However, Liftoil picks it up and decides to confront the room full of boys about who wrote it. Not only does everyone look clueless about it, but Sky even jokes about the sender's taste buds for liking her. Aera decides to walk out of there angrily and starts crying. When Spoil learns about the whole episode, she goes to apologize to her friend and confesses to having placed the note in her locker, saying she wanted the boys to know that Aera is off limits and that she's their only available option. The girl explains that it was meant to be a joke since Aera herself didn't express interest in any of the boys, but somehow Aera looks really triggered about the matter. She blames her for choosing to humiliate her while Spoil fails to understand how it's humiliating at all. If anything, it's just a lighthearted prank. Spoil angrily walks out after saying that Aera is actually embarrassed for being taken as dating someone because she wasn't sincere in telling her that she doesn't like anyone. Her outburst leaves Aera crying further until she's approached by Alan, who consoles her gently while still minding their boundaries. The incident changes her views about all men being brutes and not so gentle. It's revealed that her insecurities stem from being constantly friend-zoned throughout her educational journey. The girl has had quite a many male friends who at one point or the other would treat her very specially, but each time she tried to take things further, they stepped back saying they didn't consider her any more than just a friend. Eventually, she distanced herself from the opposite gender, sticking close to Spoil and unconsciously causing the girl to lose out on some romantic opportunities as well. Deep inside, she has admitted that no one is ever going to like her, so she's not supposed to keep her hopes high, and the love note just happened to rub salt on her wounds. As both the girls finally simmer down from their heated argument, they patch up on the texts, but the peace only lasts for the night as she once again finds a love note in her locker the next day. The note is similar with a teddy bear drawn on it and accompanied by a teddy bear plushie. Aera angrily confronts Spoil for repeating the offense, but is left perplexed when the other girl expresses her ignorance about the matter. Spoil suggests that with so many boys in a close vicinity, one of them must have taken a liking to her, but Aera doesn't take it as anything more than a prank. Walking towards the elevator, she hears Spoil shouting about the first person to enter the lift after her being her admirer. The girl doesn't take it seriously, but still looks affected by it, getting anxious until the lift doors open at another floor, revealing all the 7 boys from her club room. The boys notice her nervousness and fail to find its source as she runs away the moment the elevator stops at another floor. On the other hand, Aera looks determined not to let her heart get astray. She discovers that the teddy bear plushie comes with a voice feature that has a classic song recorded in it which goes like, "I'm just a guy who wants to take care of you." Spoil looks impressed with the sender's efforts and suggests playing the song in the club room to watch everyone's reaction and determine the identity of the person. However, none of the boys looks bothered by the song or reveals any unusual behavior that could be used as a hint. Instead, Sky complains about the music being too loud. The girls then decide to get help from the CCTV footage, but find the view blocked by a lizard. They only manage to get a picture of the culprit's shoulder and narrow down the list of suspicious people to 3, Alan, Gent, and Sky. For Pock and Play, Aera believes they already have a girlfriend, which isn't the case anymore, but she doesn't know it. Neo is a junior, and she believes that Liftoil is also not interested in her. One by one, she discards the 3 shortlisted people as well because she doesn't believe that Alan or Gent are that kind of people, and Sky has been horrible to her throughout their childhood. She eventually tells Spoil to forget it, considering it's just a prank anyway. However, Spoil is too intrigued to give up now. She convinces her to observe the boys one by one to find the person who placed that teddy bear in her locker. Following her insistence, Aera accepts Pock's invitation to play table tennis. During the game, she learns that he's already broken up with his ex-girlfriend. The young man even shares his grief with her about being cheated on with another boy, and Aera is left to console him. He denies having ever gifted a teddy bear to anyone, leave alone Aera, who's just a friend. On their way back from the game, Aera makes him listen to the song "I'm Just a Guy," and is surprised to learn that he already knows the lyrics. The young man admits having listened to the song in his childhood, and ends up saving her from a dog giving her some heroic vibes. Later that night, they both are seen to be thinking about each other, but Pak decides against texting her upon being reminded of his ex-girlfriend. On the other hand, Aera enjoys her mother's company, who reminisces how her father proposed to her by leaving a song cassette recorded in his own voice in her mailbox. The older lady was smitten by the move and couldn't reject him when he finally came out to personally confess his love for her. Her mother's story reminds Aera of the recorded song in the teddy bear, wondering about the possibility of it not being a prank, but a true confession. Next day, Pak gives a water gun to be used against a dog attack in the future, but is discouraged by Alan, who reveals that they're lucky to not get bitten, as dogs tend to get more furious when thrown water at. Spoil thinks that Pak broke up with his girlfriend for her since he knows the song, but Aera doesn't look too sure about it. So they decide to test the next person on the wheel, that happens to be Neo. The girls search up his social media profile that reveals his immense interest in classical music. Seeing this, they're almost sure that it's him. However, their secret investigation is halted by Neo's arrival, who plays a famous old song much to everyone's delight, except, as always, Sky. He crosses the club division line once again to turn off the tape recorder, leaving Aera angry for repeating the offense, and she starts pushing him out of their club's space. Almost the whole room is left shocked to watch them fight as Sky spills his black coffee on her white sneakers and claims to buy her a new one, but she refuses to accept the offer and angrily walks out of there. Lift, Toil, and Play follow her out and try to lift her mood with the use of humor, suggesting she adopts the fashion of mismatched shoes like a famous celebrity. Sky too feels guilty about it and silently follows her on the way home, but acts too proud to admit his mistake. Meanwhile, Aera cuts off the possibility of Neo being the prankster just based on the fact that he knows other songs by the same singer. She decides with Spoil to test the next candidate on the wheel. Next day, during their psychology class, the teacher talks about the signs that indicate a person is lying, one of them being looking to their left to evade eye contact. The teacher instructs them to pair up for the upcoming assignment, and as always, Aera wishes to pair up with Spoil. However, Spoil hurriedly denies the offer, pointing out the fact that people have started taking them as a couple, thus her barren love life, because boys don't approach her anymore. The girls walk up to their lockers, where Aera finds another gift from her secret admirer, the smiling bear. This time, it's a pair of shoes. Once again, they are left feeling stuck and trying to find out who this secret admirer can be. Aera keeps removing all the names from the list using different reasons, but Spoil suggests the use of psychology to find out the real culprit. One by one, they show the pair of expensive shoes to all the boys to observe who avoids eye contact. The person to do that would be deemed the said admirer. However, none of them avoids the topic. If anything, they all give remarks on her new shoes in their signature style. But Aera confusedly discusses her problem with Spoil, revealing that she hasn't gotten the chance to see Sky's reaction yet, while the other 6 all evaded her eye contact and rolled their eyeballs to the left when talking about her shoes. Spoil encourages her to confront Sky about it, but the young man laughs hysterically when Aera asks her if he placed those new shoes in her locker. He smugly exclaims to not have lost his mind in buying such an expensive item for her, causing Aera to angrily walk away. However, he keeps smiling while watching her walk away. Later, she receives a goodnight text from an unknown asking her to take care of her new shoes. Aera shows it to Spoil the next day, who accepts the message request, causing the smiling bear to instantly hop on a call. However, the man doesn't say anything. The girls are left to listen to the sound of drums, and the instructor telling the boys to tuck their shirts in. Aera and Spoil instantly run to the music room, but find everyone gone except Sky. They return to the club room and closely observe every boy's attire to see who's not wearing a proper uniform. All but Alan are found completely dressed, which is quite unlike the young man, and he admits to accidentally sitting on a chewing gum and therefore using his shirt to hide the stain. Seeing that all the suspects are in the same room, Spoil urges Aera to call the smiling bear, but he denies the call, leaving them with no clue. Meanwhile, Aera helps Pak shoot a fly, making him grateful to her, but Neo seems to dislike their growing friendship and drags her away from there. The junior seems to be hitting on her as he offers her his popsicle in a suggestive manner and requests her to let him rest his head on her lap for a few minutes in exchange of choosing to be a permanent member of her club for the whole year. The offer sounds appealing, and she allows it against her discomfort for an entire 5 minutes. She uses the chance to probe him if he has a social media account, and the young man admits to having 5 as he uses them to sell stuff. Later that night, she's offered a ride home by Gent owing to the bad weather, and Aera gratefully accepts the invitation. She finds his car to be full of cat food and discovers his love for the felines. Gent even compares her to a cat for being too lazy and liking to sleep. He then takes her to an expensive restaurant for dinner and offers to pay for the meal. Aera does like the place but finds it too expensive. She doesn't hesitate to express her opinion when Gent asks her about it. However, her doubts about him being the smiling bear are washed away when he reveals having brought his other friends to the place as well. After the meal, she's dropped off at her place and given an umbrella for the walk from the car to her home. His gentlemanly gestures are taken quite appreciatively by Aera. Next morning, she's once again reminded of the smiling bear's existence with a text reminding her that she's late today. At the same time, she meets Alan, who looks worried that she might have caught a fever and insists that she accompanies him to the doctor, but she brushes it off. With time, her fever gets worse, and she ends up taking a nap in the club room with the help of Alan, who provides her with a blanket and his handkerchief to put on her eyes. Not just that, he sits outside the club to prevent anyone from breaching her privacy and to provide her comfort, which leaves the girl smiling for no reason. Upon waking up, she encounters Neo, who requests her to be his model partner for a couple t-shirt sponsorship. Aera agrees after a bit of reluctance due to his childish antics. Later in the day, she finds Gent photographing a cat. The young man turns around to take a few candid shots of her, making her giggle and remind him that taking human photos is against their club's rules. She also buys a cotton candy pack for Alan as a thank you gift and learns that the otherwise perfect guy doesn't know how to open a rubber band. She finds it cute and mentions it in her audio diary later that night. As promised, Neo arrives at her home the next day with the sponsored package and introduces her to his live audience as his girlfriend. However, he quickly brushes it off, calling it a joke, and takes out the couple t-shirt that they're supposed to review. Turns out it's one big t-shirt with 2 necklines and only 1 sleeve on each side. For the middle part, they're not supposed to take their arms out and instead hold their hands secretly. Neo holds Aera's hand, but it's clear she's not too happy about it. After their live stream, Neo helps Aera's mom with dinner and her mom starts to like him. Then Neo tells Aera that because of her, his live stream got a lot of views, so they should become a real couple. Aera blushes and rushes inside. Later that night, she tells everything to Spoil, who gets suspicious that either Alan or Neo could be the mysterious smiling bear. The next day at university, Aera gets stuck in an elevator and screams for help. Pac rushes over and tries to pry open the door, but just then, Aera walks up behind him and asks what he's doing. Confused, Pac says he thought she was trapped, but the security guard laughs, realizing the misunderstanding. Pac tells Aera to call him first next time she's in trouble. She nods and walks away while Pac laughs at his own silly mistake. Smiling Bear leaves a plant in Aera's locker, and just as she's startled by it, Gent appears, and scares her even more by showing a photo he took of her. He tells Aera it's Smiling Day, and hands her a photo of Spoil, too, that he also clicked. In class, Spoil tells Aera that Gent can't be Smiling Bear, because if he were, he wouldn't take pictures of Spoil. Then the teacher gives them an assignment on music and human emotions, which leaves Aera stressed, wondering how she'll manage it. Just then, Play walks in with his guitar and Aera asks for his help. He agrees in one go, telling her to meet him at the park tomorrow for his performance. The next day, Aera, Spoil, and Liftoil head to the park. It's hot, so Aera gives her fan to Liftoil, but he suggests they share it and he gets closer to her. Aera's heart starts racing, and when Liftoil pulls her face towards him, she freezes, but then manages to step back. At the park, they watch Play's performance where everyone is enjoying the music and taking photos. Spoil urges Liftoil to take a picture, and reluctantly he does. After the performance, Play asks Aera if she wants him to perform while looking at the camera because he is camera shy. Aera gets confused, so Play tells that if he looked at her instead, it would make him even more nervous. Spoil offers that Play could look at her instead, and Play goes completely quiet. Play starts strumming his guitar, explaining how human emotions are like music, and you just need to know how to recognize them. He plays tunes based on different emotions, and Aera correctly identifies them except for one. Play explains that the final tune is about love, and as he starts to elaborate, Liftoil quickly interrupts, saying their assignment is done. Play gives him a sharp look. Later, Aera asks Play why he's performing at a park instead of a club. Play explains that while he performs in clubs for money, he plays in the park for himself to connect with nature. He even tries to smell Aera, but she steps away, and Liftoil makes a comment which leaves Play pouting again. As a thank you, Aera invites Play for a treat, but he says he has to go to a club, so the group decides to tag along. At the club, Spoil tells Aera that Play is playing this song for her, but Aera doesn't believe it. A club member then confirms that the song was played on Play's request, making Aera look at him closely, and to her surprise, Play is looking at her with romantic eyes. After the performance, Play offers Aera a drink, but Spoil refuses, knowing Aera can't handle alcohol. However, Play insists, saying he wants to see Aera drunk. Despite Liftoil's objections, Aera ends up drinking, and the next morning she wakes up panicking because she's lying next to Liftoil. Freaking out, she wonders how she ended up there, and Liftoil asks if she really doesn't remember anything from last night. He shows her a video that shocks her. In the video, Aera and Spoil are both ridiculously drunk. Spoil is clinging to some big guy, begging him to take her home, while Aera is on stage singing and making weird moves along with Spoil. Liftoil recorded everything, and at one point Play had to step in and escort them out, apologizing to everyone at the club. He even carried Aera out and laughed at her antics. Even outside, they were still drunk, and as Play tried to hail a taxi, Aera poured water on herself, trying to stop a cab. A taxi finally stopped, but Aera vomited all over Play before he managed to shove her into the car. After that, Spoil started clinging to Play. Watching the video, Aera starts pulling her hair, regretting everything she did. She can't believe what she's done and wonders what Play must be thinking of her. But Play was smiling at her antics, and despite the mess, he found himself liking Aera, even with his vomit-covered shirt. The next morning, Liftoil tries feeding Aera breakfast like they're kids again. They even play rock, paper, scissors to decide who has to drink milk. Liftoil lets Aera taste flower juice and then takes a sip himself, causing Aera's heart to race again. Aera asks her mom about her and Liftoil's relationship, and her mom tells her they are distant relatives and can get married if they want. Frustrated, Aera storms off. Back when they were kids, Liftoil didn't know how to play with a yo-yo, and Aera had to teach him. In college, Liftoil stops Aera to show her some yo-yo tricks and tries to get close to her again. Aera freezes up and steps back in panic. Liftoil then shows her his family tree, and Aera realizes he likes her too. When Aera gets home, her mom tells her that Liftoil and his mom are coming over for dinner. They all eat together, and Liftoil's mom shows them childhood pictures of Liftoil and Aera being close. Later that night, with a mischievous smile, Liftoil's mom suggests they sleep together like they used to as kids. Liftoil is wearing Aera's shirt and jokes about how beautiful her clothes smell, causing her to freeze again. He thanks her for always comforting him when they were kids, and after some playful banter, Aera tries to leave, but Liftoil grabs her hand, asking her to stay, making her heart race even more. But Aera thinks Liftoil will annoy her at night, so she kicks him away and goes to sleep. In her room, she ends up looking at her family tree. The next morning, Aera is super angry because Liftoil never told her that they aren't actually blood relatives. Liftoil, trying to smooth things over, gets close and explains that whether or not they are related, he always wants to see her happy because she means so much to him. Hearing this, Aera freezes like a statue. At university, Aera tells Spoil everything, and Spoil, being her usual self, jokes that this means the contenders for the Smiling Bear title have now increased from 6 to 7, but Aera isn't happy at all because she never saw Liftoil in that way. To make things worse, Liftoil starts sending her weird pictures to annoy her, which only irritates Aera further. Liftoil, of course, finds it hilarious. To get away from the madness, Aera goes to Play to apologize for the other day. Play, in his charming way, tells her not to worry and casually calls her darling, which makes Aera's eyes light up. She asks him if he calls everyone darling, and right at that moment, he addresses another girl by her name. Aera feels a strange tickling sensation in her feet and starts looking at Play with romantic eyes. But then Play gets a call and lo and behold calls the person on the other side darling too. Aera's daydreams shatter and she walks away with a pout. In class, the teacher is explaining all kinds of phobias, including one about being afraid of beautiful people. Spoil points to Aera and jokes that such people must definitely be terrified of her making Aera smile. Back at home, Aera records in her diary, worried that waiting for the Smiling Bear might turn into resentment, and what if she ends up falling for someone else? What would happen to the Smiling Bear then? The next day at university, Aera finds her room fully decorated. Gent approaches her and announces that it's been 3 months since their group formed, so he's throwing a party to celebrate. Gent gives Aera a notebook where he's written 50 funny facts about her. As she reads it, Aera makes a face because all the facts make her sound absolutely crazy. Gent watches her closely, thinking she looks really cute. Then Aera reads one fact that says she rarely smiles, but when she does, she looks incredibly beautiful. This gives Aera butterflies and she starts looking at Gent with loving eyes. But just then, the rest of the group arrives and it turns out Gent made fun fact notebooks for everyone. Aera's mood deflates because she thought she was the only one being made to feel special. Everyone is enjoying the party, except for Alan, who is miserable because he has a balloon phobia. Everyone laughs at him, not believing him, until Alan snaps and tells them that his phobia is no joke. Everyone falls silent, and Jen apologizes on behalf of the group, but Alan storms out anyway. Aera follows him and gently tells him he needs to face his fears. Alan, feeling better, thanks her and returns to the party. Back at the party, they tie Pac to a chair, take off his shirt because why miss a chance to show off, and scare him with cockroaches. Pac screams his head off and afterward everyone dances. Sitting next to Pac, the others start making fun of Aera's dancing because she looks like a zombie on the dance floor. When she goes to change the song, she gets shocked by the current and starts twitching, which only makes everyone laugh harder. Pac senses something's wrong and kicks Aera, who falls back only to be caught by Gent. In the washroom, Play tells Pac it seems like he's interested in Aera. Pac admits he started to like her. Afterward, Aera and Spoil panic because they realize they need to start studying for their exams. Alan helps them with their studies, and the next day, Aera helps him with his dialogue practice. As they stroll around, Aera spots a boating area, something she loves, so Alan takes her boating. Meanwhile, Sky is doing a photo shoot for a restaurant, and in exchange they offer him a feast. The food is too much for one person, so he thinks about calling Aera. On the other hand, Aera is getting tired of boating, so Alan starts fanning her with his hands. Such a silly gesture. Just then, Sky calls Aera and they meet for lunch. While eating, they reminisce about their childhood and how they used to play and fight a lot. Aera asks Sky about his female friends, and he tells her that besides her, he doesn't have any and he's never dated anyone. But he does have a crush on one of his female friends. Hearing this, Aera freezes because she's the only girl he's close to. Sky, however, adds that just because you like someone doesn't mean you have to be with them. Aera starts feeling bad for him. After lunch, they run into Grace, and Sky asks why she didn't join Aera's club. Aera shyly admits that she was scared off by all the guys. Sky jokes, asking what that walking ghost is doing in their group then. Grace approaches them, and Sky, placing his hand on her shoulder, asks why she didn't join. Grace gets terrified and runs away. Aera scolds Sky for touching her, saying Grace gets scared of handsome guys. Sky, being cheeky, starts touching Aera, teasing her that she's not scared, which frustrates Aera. Back at university, Aera creates an anonymous ID to help people with their problems. She soon receives a message from Smiling Bear, who tells her he has a crush on a girl and asks what to do. Aera's eyes light up as she looks around, asking for his location. He replies with, "The gym." Aera knows only Pac is in the gym, so she devises a plan with Spoil to act like she's gained weight. Pac takes her to the gym, but all Aera can think about is getting hold of his phone. Despite all her efforts, she fails to grab it, and on top of that, Pac makes her do a ton of exercises, leaving her completely exhausted. After the gym, Aera is stuffing her face with food when Play arrives. Startled, Aera greets him. Play mentions that he lives nearby and is happy because they're wearing matching t-shirts. He hands her a flower, and Aera jokingly says she knows he's taking it to a temple for Buddha. Play invites her to join him, and they go together to pray. Aera is impressed because she thought Play wasn't into all this, and she sees him helping children too, which makes her like him even more. But once back home, Aera finds herself thinking about all the gifts she received from the guys, realizing she's starting to catch feelings for each of them. Now she's desperate to find Smiling Bear and clear up all the confusion. Pac and Aera were playing basketball when Aera injured her fingers. Even though it wasn't Pac's fault, he kept apologizing and tried to help fix her injury. As Pac was carefully tending to Aera, she began to look at him with growing affection. Meanwhile, when Gent saw Aera's injury and asked her what happened, Aera explained that she got hurt while playing basketball. Gent brought her a pain relief spray and applied it on her fingers. Seeing Gent take such care of her made Aera happy, but just then Pac returned with her belongings and began to look after her too, which Gent didn't like at all. Feeling annoyed, Gent left the scene. After class, Pac and Aera went out for dinner, and Pac was still taking care of her, which made Aera feel really good. But suddenly she choked on some food and Pac started patting her back to help. Later, when Aera got home, she told Spoil everything that had happened. Spoil commented that it seemed like all 7 boys had developed feelings for Aera. They both decided that they needed to find out who Smiling Bear was soon. At that moment, Aera received messages from Smiling Bear, who was concerned about her, but she angrily ignored them. Meanwhile, all 7 boys were reminiscing about the sweet moments they had shared with Aera, as it was clear that each of them was developing feelings for her. The next day at university, Smiling Bear left a herbal tea in Aera's locker. After drinking it, Spoil commented that the tea was extremely bitter. They came up with a plan to have all the boys drink the tea, thinking that whoever didn't react to its bitterness must be Smiling Bear. They went around telling everyone that the tea was sent by Aera's mom, so out of respect, none of the boys made any faces after drinking it. This made Spoil and Aera rethink their plan, as no one gave them any clues. Just then, Pac arrived, and the moment he tasted the tea, he immediately spat it out. Their plan had failed. Aera, now fed up, decided that she would just ask all the boys directly who Smiling Bear was. After exams, Aera began to think about Alan because his help had made her exams go really well. Outside the exam hall, Alan was waiting for her and Aera thanked him for tutoring her. Alan then told her that all club heads had to submit a project related to their club or their club would be shut down. This made Aera a bit anxious. Alan also invited her to a party that Gent was throwing to celebrate the end of exams, but Aera made an excuse and declined. Even Spoil tried to convince her to go, but Aera refused as she was too worried about the club project. Saturday arrived and Aera was at home brainstorming ideas for the project. Suddenly, she got a call from Neo about something urgent, so she rushed to meet him. However, when she arrived, she wasn't impressed to learn that Neo had only called her for a live streaming session. Neo, in his quirky style, danced to some 90s songs, and although Aera was shy at first, they ended up having a great time dancing together. Neo then dragged her to the party, but they couldn't find a vehicle. The only available taxi was reserved for foreigners, so they both pretended to be tourists and hopped in. When the driver tried to overcharge them, Neo started live streaming and exposing him, forcing the driver to flee. They both laughed a lot at the incident. Neo tried to get close to Aera again, but she hurried inside. Inside, only their group members were present, as Gent had rented the entire club for the party. Play got on stage with a guitar and invited Aera to sing, but she refused. When Sky suggested she sing, Aera shot back, asking why he didn't go and sing instead. Sky took the challenge and sang beautifully. But soon Ghost Girl started feeling nauseous, and Aera and Spoil took her away. Aera thought about directly asking everyone who Smiling Bear was, but worried that they might make fun of her. On stage, Spoil started asking each boy indirect questions about Aera, but they all dodged her questions. When it was Sky's turn, Spoil directly asked if he liked Aera. Aera, overhearing the conversation, quickly turned off the lights in embarrassment. The next day, Aera called Spoil and suggested they should stop searching for Smiling Bear, but Spoil refused to give up. At university, Ghost Girl was collecting money from everyone. As it turned out, she had only joined the club for cash. She eventually left the club while the rest sat down to discuss their project. As Aera was leaving, she saw her senior Gun, who had come to the university for some work. Gun was actually Aera's high school crush. When Aera got home, she recorded about the encounter in her diary, but wasn't sure what to think about it. She remembered how they used to spend time together in school, and how she once thought Gun liked her too. Aera had even confessed her feelings to him back then, but Gun had gently turned her down, saying he only saw her as a junior. Heartbroken, Aera had blocked his number and moved on. In the present, Aera decided she didn't want to get hurt again, and blocked Smiling Bear's number as well. Back at the university, she locked her locker with a sense of finality. The next day, Liftoil, Spoil, and Aera were discussing their club project, when Liftoil came up with the idea of making a modern love story music video using 90s songs, but with a twist, and the twist being that one girl is loved by multiple guys. Aera liked the idea, but refused to play the lead girl, so Spoil was cast instead. Liftoil asked the other club members to take part, but when they found out Spoil was the lead, they hesitated. However, after some convincing, they agreed. On the day of the shoot, Spoil showed up wearing glasses, but Liftoil told her to take them off. Spoil refused, but when she finally did, it turned out she had an eye infection. Liftoil and Spoil both asked Aera to step in as the lead, but Gent had to explain to her that even he didn't want to act, but couldn't say no after seeing Liftoil's excitement. Gent's words convinced Aera to agree. In the first scene, Gent was extremely shy because his face was too close to Aera's. Then Alan kissed her hand and Pac carried her on his back, and Aera, exhausted from all the shooting, was about to give up. To cheer her up, Play, going off script, tried to make her laugh. Liftoil had reserved the kissing scene for himself, but before he could do it, Spoil stopped him, and Aera ended up skating with Neo. She also fought with Sky when their scene began, but eventually delivered a good performance. At the end of the shoot, Aera shared a romantic moment with all the boys. Afterwards, she told Spoil she missed Smiling Bear, to which Spoil teased her, asking if she had fallen in love with him. The next day, Aera was biking home when a car suddenly appeared in front of her, causing her to fall. Her senior Gun came out and took care of her injuries. He offered to drop her off at college, and though she initially refused, she agreed after his insistence. At college, she couldn't stop thinking about him. When Spoil asked about it, Aera didn't answer. In the club room, Pac had brought his toddler brother, whom all the boys were doting on. Pac, however, was a bit sad because he had brought his brother specifically to meet Aera, who wasn't there due to an extra class. Back home, Aera was still thinking about Gun, so she unblocked him on her phone. Just then, Gun messaged her and they began chatting. Meanwhile, Sky showed up scolding Aera for worrying Liftoil so much. When Aera angrily asked why Sky was there, he revealed he had brought her a gift from Gent. Without looking at it, Aera tossed it on her table and continued her conversation with Gun, hoping this time something might happen between them. The next day, Gun invited her to a restaurant with invitations for both her and Sky. When Aera opened it, she was shocked as it was Gun's wedding invitation. Once again, her heart was shattered. In the computer lab, Aera ignored Spoil's chatter until she finally admitted that she just wanted to be somewhere alone, maybe even at a forest camp. Spoil realized then that Aera was feeling really depressed. Later that night, Aera's mother told her that Liftoil's mom had been hospitalized, and Aera should call him. When she did, Liftoil assured her he was fine, but secretly he was hurting. He asked her to meet him urgently in the club room. When they met, Liftoil asked her why she wanted to go camping. Aera guessed Spoil had told him, to which Liftoil replied that everyone was worried about her. He then gave her a forest camper's jacket and took her outside where the whole club was sitting around a bonfire. Spoil told her they had brought the camp to her because when Gent found out she wanted to go camping, he arranged everything right there in the college. Gent added that Alan helped too, since his model student status was the only reason the teachers gave them permission. Neo started showing everyone pictures, and Alan recognized one, but before Neo could reveal anything, Aera stopped him. However, Neo managed to spill that he had slept in Aera's lab and shared her ice cream, which left everyone stunned. Aera quickly changed the subject and left. After seeing Gunn's wedding invitation, Sky finally understood why Aera was so upset and encouraged her to move on. Everyone was having a great time, but Liftoil quietly slipped away into his tent. Aera followed, and after asking why, Liftoil hugged her tightly and began to cry because his mother was about to have surgery, and he was terrified. Outside, everyone continued to enjoy themselves. Alan went to bed at his usual time, but soon after he stormed out covered in lipstick marks. Everyone burst out laughing when they realized Play was behind it, since he had lipstick on his face too. Alan chased after him and the fun continued. Aera thanked everyone, saying she had never enjoyed camping alone as much as she did now. As they all looked up at the stars, Aera called them her friends, admitting that this was the most fun she'd had in a long time. The next day, as soon as Aera wakes up, she sees a small child in the tent. Both she and Spoil freak out, but then Pak tells them it's his brother. He asks Aera to babysit, but Aera doesn't like kids at all and struggles to handle him. Pak helps her out and jokes that they look just like parents, to which Aera scolds him. But then the baby pees on her clothes and she starts screaming. Everyone else is treating Pak's brother very sweetly, but Aera and Spoil begin to suspect that maybe this boy is actually Pak's son. Meanwhile, in the bathroom, a guy secretly takes a picture of Alan, and when he catches him, he beats him up. But he escapes, and as a result, Alan loses his modeling position and his posters are removed from the college. Feeling down, Alan is comforted by Aera, who encourages him. Alan admits he was getting bored of it anyway and says now he can finally do normal student stuff. In the canteen, Spoil and Aera talk about how Alan's photo hasn't leaked yet. Spoil then reveals that she's been online dating, but Aera warns her to be careful since she doesn't trust online dating at all. At the hospital, Aera is trying to encourage Liftoil while they wait for news about his mom's surgery. When the doctor finally comes and says his mom is stable, Liftoil bursts into tears of relief. Play meanwhile loses his job because he disobeyed his boss's wife. When Aera gets home, she tells her mom that Liftoil's mom's surgery went well and her mom is happy. Then she tells Aera that Sky came to visit. Sky advises Aera not to waste any more time on Gunn now that his wedding is coming up and even forces her to attend the wedding. Later, Aera records in her diary that the senior she had such a big crush on is getting married, and she doesn't know how she'll handle it. She starts reminiscing about all her moments with Gunn. Meanwhile, Spoil goes to the mall to meet her online date, but he looks nothing like his pictures. She tries to escape by running into an elevator, but he catches her, and she has to reluctantly go on a dinner date with him. Finally, at Gunn's wedding, Sky shows up with Aera, and they congratulate Gunn and his wife. When they take a photo together, Aera is on the verge of tears, standing so close to Gunn, and Sky notices her sadness. During dinner, Spoil actually starts to like the guy's personality, despite the awkward start. After the wedding, Gunn approaches Aera and asks about her relationship with Sky. Aera, confused, says they are just good friends, which shocks Gunn because he thought Sky had already confessed his feelings. Gunn reveals that back in school, Sky had warned him not to break Aera's heart, and if Gunn didn't love Aera, he should stop giving her false hopes. Sky had liked Aera since middle school. Aera is completely stunned by this revelation. Gunn also tells her that the reason he rejected her was because Sky had been in love with her for so long, and even though he liked her too, he couldn't pursue her out of loyalty to Sky. Gunn then asks if Aera is still upset with him, to which Aera replies that she's actually relieved to know her love wasn't one-sided. Just then, Sky arrives, but now that Aera knows about his feelings, she feels awkward because she's realizing that the boy she considered at the bottom of her list is actually her smiling bear. Aera rushes to Spoil house to share the news. Before Aera can tell her, Spoil reveals that her online date initially seemed nice, but later got inappropriate and she barely managed to escape. Hearing this, Aera advises her to stop using online dating apps altogether. Then she tells Spoil everything about the wedding, including the revelation that Sky is her smiling bear. Spoil is equally shocked to hear this. Sky also liked Aera for a long time, and whenever he saw her with Gunn, he didn't like it at all. One day he made up his mind to come up with a plan to separate the two of them, and as part of this plan he went to Gunn and told him everything. When Gunn eventually rejected Aera, Sky was secretly overjoyed watching it all unfold. After learning all this from Gunn, Aera started distancing herself from Sky. Noticing this, Sky asked her why she was acting so cold towards him. But Aera doesn't tell him anything, so Sky takes her somewhere after school. There he asks her, "Tell me honestly, what do you want to ask me?" When Aera asks Sky about his feelings, he reveals that he had a crush on her since middle school. Aera is puzzled and wonders why he never told her this before. Sky claims he did, but Aera didn't take him seriously back then because she was too busy crying over being rejected by Gunn and thought Sky was just joking like a friend. Then Sky says he only considers her a friend now and nothing more. Aera shoots back, asking if it's really that easy to forget someone you love. Sky answers with a resigned, "Yep," adding that moving on from love isn't really a big thing when it is one-sided. Aera is left stunned because, let's face it, Sky wasn't exactly the smiling bear she remembered. They both reminisce about the good old days, and in a nostalgic moment, Sky gifts Aera some shoes. Meanwhile, they cover up the painting of Aera that Sky had made. On the other side, Spoil spills the tea to Liftoil on her online date, explaining how the guy has been harassing her. Liftoil urges her to report it to the police, but Spoil has no evidence. Later, as they leave university, Liftoil spots the guy and goes into full-on Hulk mode. Spoil intervenes and they start bickering, but then Liftoil confesses he likes Spoil, which leaves her completely dumbfounded. Aera, who's been eavesdropping, realizes that Liftoil had a crush on Spoil all along and not her. Liftoil storms off in a huff, and Aera starts teasing Spoil, who is utterly confused about what to do. Back home, Aera decides to unblock Smiling Bear's number because she's dying to know who he is, especially now that Sky and Liftoil are out of the picture. The next day, she removes the lock from her locker and suddenly the gifts start pouring in. Aera even starts replying to Smiling Bear's messages. Meanwhile, Play has landed a job at another club. Pac brings snacks from his mom for everyone at college, and Neo becomes extra clingy with Aera. When Liftoil enters the room, Spoil quickly exits, and Liftoil chases after her, offering her cold drinks and snacks. Spoil playfully insists Liftoil should follow her around more often, and he happily obliges. Aera also begins saving gifts for Smiling Bear, and one day she finds the very same Smiling Bear in her locker, prompting her to think deeply. In the canteen, Grace approaches Aera, complaining that the guys in her club are super weird. Aera reassures her that they just like her, and are trying to flirt. Just then, Liftoil strolls in with Spoil acting all lovey-dovey. Aera tells Grace there's no need to be afraid of Liftoil since he's already in a relationship with Spoil. Grace, feeling a bit left out, walks away when she sees Sky. He is completely clueless and waits outside her class, having developed a crush on Grace. When Aera arrives at the club room, she sees everyone devouring the cotton candy she had given to Smiling Bear. She walks over to Neo, asking what he's up to. He reveals he's practicing lines for a drama where he'll be playing the frog in The Princess and the Frog, and he asks Aera for help with his dialogue. Of course, Neo uses this as an opportunity to flirt while the other boys sit back and watch, feeling jealous and comparing themselves to Neo. They then turn to Sky and ask why he doesn't like Aera. He replies that it's because Aera doesn't like him back and she thinks he's too good looking. This earns him a chorus of laughter, and as part of the practice, Neo acts as a frog, leans in and kisses Princess Aera, leaving her and the other boys utterly shocked. Aera gets a bit annoyed with Neo, but he tells her that his lips didn't actually touch her. Then Play chimes in with a cheeky flying kiss and asks if his lips can touch hers, causing all the boys to burst into laughter. This only infuriates Aera, and she storms off in a huff. Meanwhile, Sky is waiting for Grace. As soon as she steps out, he apologizes for that day, but because she's a little scared of the handsome boys, she doesn't say anything and starts to leave. Sky stops her and asks if she can be his friend, but Grace just stands there speechless. When Aera gets home, she receives a message from Smiling Bear asking her to come to the club room early the next day, because it's an important day. Upon arriving at the club room, Aera notices no one is there. Just then, the lights turn on and everyone shouts, "Happy birthday!" They encourage her to wear a snow-white dress, but Aera hesitates. After some coaxing, she finally puts it on and they all celebrate her birthday. Alan takes her to see his photo collection, which includes pictures of her, because she had inspired him. This sweet gesture makes Aera really happy. Then Play sings a song for her, and everyone enjoys the moment. Neo apologizes to Aera for not being able to touch her lips, which makes her glare at him before she heads outside. Pac follows her and gives her an apple, assuring her that it's not poisonous. Aera can't help but laugh and takes the apple. During the party, Sky brings Grace in and everyone is delighted to see her. However, Grace is still nervous around the boys, but Sky encourages her to enjoy herself. As they have fun, everyone starts teasing them as a couple. Sky clarifies that they're just friends and then starts asking about Spoil and Liftoil's relationship. Just then, Play and Alan tease Spoil for dancing too close to Liftoil, prompting Spoil to deny it and walk away. Liftoil, however, admits he likes Spoil and, trying to be serious, tells her he's genuinely interested. Spoil, blushing, accidentally buries her face in a cake, making Liftoil chuckle at her cute reaction. They spend some quality time together, and Grace is starting to feel comfortable, shaking off her fear of the boys. Later, when Aera opens her locker, she finds 2 cupcakes and Spoil calls out her name. This leads to a group photo being taken. Once home, Aera admires the cupcake when she receives a text from Smiling Bear complimenting her on looking really good while being happy. The next day, Aera invites Spoil to help clean the club room, but Spoil declines, saying she's busy with something important. Just as Aera starts tidying up, when Gent arrives with his servants and tells them to clean up charming Aera, since he had also organized her birthday party. Meanwhile, Spoil is on a date with Liftoil, which is why she turned Aera down. They're having a great time together. After cleaning the club room, Gent asks Aera for a treat, and she jokingly says she can't afford an expensive one. However, Gent is eager to go anywhere with her, so she takes him to a local street food spot. When he asks for the menu, the lady laughs, saying he can't see the board. Gent tries street food for the first time, and he and Aera share a laugh as they enjoy their meal together. Back home, Aera finds a picture Gent posted of the food they had shared, and this makes her really happy. The next day, Spoil is brainstorming new plans to find Smiling Bear, but Aera declares she won't play hide-and-seek anymore, claiming she's happy in her life. Just then, Smiling Bear messages her on her anonymous ID saying he's tired of waiting and is finally going to confess to his crush, and this made both of them. Aera uploads her music video titled "Teenage Romance is Not Allowed" to social media, but sadly no one is watching it. Fearing that their club might shut down, everyone starts singing to distract themselves from their worries. After that, Aera and Spoil decide that if their club really does close, they will just join another one together. Aera's teacher asks her how she plans to save the club, and Aera assures her that she'll do her best. However, Aera becomes increasingly anxious for the club, and the next day she finds a lollipop in her locker the next day, along with a note telling her not to worry. Just then, she feels something sticky on her shoe and starts chasing after the glue to the Smiling Bear, hoping to find him. She first runs into play, but as she figures out he is not the one, then Pac approaches her. While they're listening to music, Aera notices glue on Pac's shoes and confronts him about it. Pac then reveals that he was the one putting all the gifts in Aera's locker because he likes her and asks for a response. However, Aera isn't thrilled about this revelation that Pac is Smiling Bear. She shows Pac the messages, and after examining them, she realizes that those texts are not from Pac, and Smiling Bear isn't just one person, but actually two. She quickly calls Spoil to share the news, but is confused about how to track down Smiling Bear online. Suddenly, Neo steps up and confesses that he is Smiling Bear and created the account to stay close to Aera. He admits that he was the first to like Aera, and that's why he left his photography club to join hers. When he saw the Smiling Bear note in her locker, he decided to start chatting with her under that name. He asks Aera if she likes him, but she leaves without answering. That night, Spoil tells Aera that she has to choose between Neo and Pac, but Spoil herself is quite confused as she didn't feel much happiness meeting Smiling Bear, let alone love. The next day, Neo and Pac sit beside Aera in the club and they begin to bicker and brag about themselves. Aera feels like escaping from the awkwardness when Alan calls Pac away for a club meeting. As soon as Pac leaves, Neo grabs Aera's hand and takes her to the cafe, asking her who she will choose as he suspects Pac also likes her. Later, Pac invites Aera to play table tennis, but she declines. However, he insists and they end up playing in the student hall. During the game, Pac shares that his ex-girlfriend has tried to patch things up with him, but he turned her down because he likes Aera now. Aera doesn't respond as she's confused about her feelings for Smiling Bear and is still grappling with her emotions, so she leaves without saying anything. The following day, Alan and Aera see a notice posted outside their room stating that their club will be disbanded next year. The next day, Aera decides to reject both Poke and Neo, saying, "Can't you guys just be friends?" That day, she realizes that rejecting someone is tougher than being rejected. Meanwhile, after being turned down by Aera, both boys are having a total meltdown, and Aera is also feeling quite sad for them. But with a heartfelt thank you for their love and support, she closes her laptop and ID. A few days later, as everyone retrieves their club gear, Neo and Pac cross paths, and in a rather comical scene, they both try to shove each other's away and eventually become friends. Meanwhile, Alan's spot in the university is taken over by the model student Gent. When Alan sees Gent's photos, Gent comes over to ask if Alan is upset about it. Alan replies, "Not at all. I know you deserve to be a model student." On the final day, Gent brings gifts for all the club members, which makes everyone incredibly happy. They're all celebrating their last day together, although Aera is feeling down. Spoil reminds her that they've made lifelong friends in this club, so she shouldn't be sad. This cheers Aera up a bit. She decides to take one last look at her room, but Sky pops up and cheerfully tells her to leave because he needs to pick up Grace. At Aera's house, Liftoil and his mom arrive, and Liftoil's mom starts teasing Aera about how her son has found a girlfriend, making Aera awkwardly smile. Liftoil informs Aera that he and Spoil are going to exchange gifts, and he suggests she should tell Spoil not to get him anything too expensive. Aera thinks, love has made Liftoil wise. Both of them are happy. The next day, Aera finds herself in an awkward lift ride with Neo and Pac, but thankfully only Gent is talking to her. At the canteen, Spoil insists that Aera should join the club, but she doesn't want to be a third wheel. When Spoil mentions there will be a lot of people, Aera reluctantly agrees, only to realize she's not just third-wheeling, but fifth-wheeling, as the other four are too busy chatting away. Suddenly, Play blows Aera a flying kiss while singing, and she bolts outside with Play following her and trying to flirt. Just when Aera is about to lose her temper, Play introduces her to his girlfriend, leaving Aera completely shocked. Back inside, Play happily shares details about his girlfriend, who happens to be the owner of the club this time, and everyone rejoices. Liftoil seizes the moment and proposes to Spoil in front of everyone, to which she happily agrees. Play's girlfriend praises him, saying that despite being flirty, he'd never betray her. Everyone enjoys the party in high spirits. The next day, Aera records in her diary about how all the people around her are so happy and in love. Seeing their joy fills Aera with happiness. The day after that, Alan invites Aera to a Saturday party where he announces he has received a scholarship to study in another country. Everyone congratulates him, but when Gent mentions he's also moving abroad with his family, Aera feels a pang of sadness and sneaks away to cry, telling Spoil that she doesn't like farewell parties. Spoil is baffled by what Aera is so upset. At home, Aera grapples with her emotions, only to realize she's missing Gent. A text from Gent and a song playing remind her of him, prompting her to read the fun facts he'd shared. Among them, she discovers that Pac always leaves gifts in her locker. Aera reflects that if she had read this earlier, she would have known about the smiling bear much sooner. The next day, she asks her music teacher what it means if you think of someone when you hear a song. The teacher explains that it likely means you have feelings for that person. Upon seeing Gent's model poster, Aera confesses to him that he likes him so much. On the day Gent is supposed to leave the country, Aera is gloomily at home when suddenly the doorbell rings. To her surprise, it's Gent's poster, and behind it notes cascade down, detailing all the things Gent had done for her, from leaving gifts in her locker to celebrating her birthday. Although he never expressed his feelings because of Pac, and he had overheard Aera confessing in front of his poster and decided it was time to share his own feelings too. When Aera sees Liftoil and Spoil with the poster, she thinks they are making fun of her, but then Gent steps out of his car declaring, "This is reality. I didn't go anywhere." They both propose to each other, and a few days later, all the boys and girls have moved ahead in their respective fields, finding true love or real friendships along the way. Aera excels in her class. One night, Aera notices a commotion outside her house where people are singing. As she steps out, Gent dramatically proposes to her, and she happily says yes. They talk in their room while Liftoil and Spoil think finally Aera found her true love. When Aera asks Gent how long he's liked her, he admits he fell for her the moment he saw her light up in the locker room, deciding he wanted to keep her happy. Aera confesses that she didn't realize when she fell for him, but when she thought he was leaving, it all became clear. But Gent is here to stay, and they giggle like a typical teenage couple, wrapping up our story of the Secret Seven with a happy ending.